Hey everybody, this is Chuck Marohn with Strong Towns. Today is normally our Friday News Digest day. We've been experimenting a little bit this year with different formats on the News Digest. And one of the things we wanted to try was to have some roundtable conversations with different people who have a lot to offer in terms of the conversations going on. This week, we've been kind of deeply enmeshed in the issue of engineering profession reform and how we should be going about changing the way engineers approach things, the way that we approach design, the way we approach relating with the public, the way we approach understanding how to prioritize projects and funding. And we wanted to set up a panel to invite some people who are our members who have some really good insights on this stuff and can offer some perspective. I've never done one of these live Hangouts before. We've done lots of Google Hangouts. I've never done one that's been broadcast. And so sent out some invitations, and I'm kind of hoping that I'm not just going to be sitting here talking to myself. I'm hoping that our panelists will be here in a second. They all indicated that they were able to make it, and so we'll see. Hopefully this will work out. By way of a background here, our cities have been shaped by the engineering profession for a long time. Just finished a big, thick book on the Roman Empire, and part of the fascinating thing in that book by Will Durant was just how the engineering profession was very similar to what it is today. All the good and all the bad, the magnificent things that people built, along with some of the arrogance, quite frankly, of some of the things that they would do. And, that kind of, I think, human part of the engineer has always been with us. Engineers think big. We benefit from them thinking big. And, society also sometimes overreaches because engineers think big. I don't think that's necessarily a bad aspect of the profession. But in modern United States, there's certainly been a pivot point with the automobile and with the end of the Great Depression and World War II, and of this switch that we made as a country from one development pattern to another, one that was based around cities and places to another that was based around the automobile and a more widely dispersed pattern of development. As we made this shift, lots and lots of money poured into the engineering profession. And as this happened, not only did we go out and build a lot of things as engineers, but we began to kind of codify our understandings as we went. There's a lot of conversation about the good and bad, the benefits of the Robert Moses approach. I don't think it's a stretch to say today that most of us, at least in the city planning profession, reject the Robert Moses approach in theory. I would argue that we still practice it all the time. Nonetheless, I think there's a notion that simply plotting down lines on paper for highways and plowing them through neighborhoods is not the way to go about doing things. I think even the engineering profession is, for the most part, on board with that. As we've gone along, though, now, we find ourselves today in 2015 in a much different position than we were back in 1950 when we really got going building all this stuff. The obvious difference is that we've built it all, right? In 1950, we didn't have an interstate system. We now do have an interstate system across the entire country. We didn't have streets in our cities that were reconfigured for the automobiles. They were still small little streets that kids played in and served as public gathering spots and served a much different function than they do today. We didn't have all the codes and manuals and, quite frankly, the research and effort that's been put into the engineering profession to develop certain standards and understandings of how different things should function and be done. All those things we have now. And some of them obviously are a help to us, many of them are a hindrance to us. They're a hindrance to us because now we have all the stuff we have to maintain. Was it all a good investment? Would we, if we had to, maintain all of it, or would we choose to only maintain some of it because not all of it's worth maintaining? The standards and the approaches that we've come up with, they work really well during an era where we're building more. Are they going to work as well in an era where we have to maintain stuff and maybe are not going to experience the level of growth tied to the new things that we build? So we have this shift going on, and the shift is reflected in the way we build our cities. It's reflected outside of the engineering profession. It's also to a large degree reflected within the engineering profession. And some of the struggles that we've had, some of the things that we've had a difficult time doing within the engineering profession is making that transition, making that change. How do we go from a profession oriented around building and building new to a profession oriented around getting more out of our current investments? I just got a little note from our executive director, Jim Kuman. I know that there's 21 people watching this right now, so I don't want to cut it off. But our panelists are not able to log in, and I'm going to take full responsibility for that. I've done a number of these Google Hangouts and have had no problem doing it. I've never done one live on air, a broadcast like this, and I'm not sure why our panelists are having a hard time logging in, but they are. If they're watching this right now, don't worry. It's not your fault. It's my fault. I'll try to salvage this and make the best that I can of it, and we'll try to pull this off at a different date. I really do apologize because I've got some great questions for you guys, and I wanted to hear the things that you had to say about these issues. As it is, we're probably not going to do this very long then, since it's just me. I do want to give the people here an opportunity. If you do have a question, we've got the Q&A board up, and you can ask those, and I'll do my best to answer them. I think, though, kind of the one thing that's on a lot of people's mind has to do with the issue of the complaint that we dealt with on the blog this week. I'm sure everybody watching this right now knows that I had a complaint filed against me at the state licensing board. And maybe I should back up and explain that a little bit so that people know what that actually means. As a professional engineer in the state of Minnesota, and this is similar to other states in the United States, there is a board that handles the licensing for engineers. They also do architects and land surveyors and a whole bunch of other professions. They have the worst acronym that I've ever seen. I can't even pretend that I could repeat it. It is a really amazingly bad acronym. In order to get your engineering license, you have to do a number of things. First, you have to complete a 4-year degree in an accredited engineering program. I got my engineering degree from the University of Minnesota. After you finish your degree, you have to take a test called the Fundamentals of Engineering exam. And I want to say that was a 4-hour test, although it might have been an 8-hour test. I know it was one of those like brutally long tests with a bunch of ridiculous questions that really more tested whether you paid attention in the first 2 years of college than anything about your abilities. But nonetheless, you have to take and pass this test, and then you're allowed to become what's called an engineer in training. The really interesting thing about the engineering profession, and I have to say I really like this aspect of it, is that you have to work for 4 years as essentially an apprentice engineer. They call it an engineer in training. You have to work for 4 years as an engineer before you're able to go out and get your license. You have to work directly on engineering related stuff. Here in Minnesota, I had to document actually the projects I had worked on. You couldn't have been doing engineering work. You couldn't have been doing filing work or whatever. You had to actually be working in the field of engineering under the tutoring or mentoring of another professional engineer. They had to sign off on that. They had to vouch for you. There was a whole process you had to go through to become eligible to get your professional engineering license. Once you become eligible, then you apply to take an exam. The exam is a full day, 8-hour exam. I want to say it's been a while for me. This was back in 99 for me, 2000, somewhere in that time frame. All I remember is that it totally kicked my butt. I got out of there and hadn't really eaten the whole day, and stopped at a place to get a bite to eat, and couldn't read the announcement board because my eyes were just fried. It was a grueling test. One of these where they give you like, 5 problems, 6 problems in the morning, you have to solve 3. Give you 6 problems in the afternoon, you have to solve 3. One of them you can get pretty easy. Another one you can work your way through, and then the third one, it's just a crapshoot. Somehow I passed. I don't look down on anybody who didn't pass the first time, because I don't. I'll say this. I think it is a really difficult test, and I think you have to have done well in an engineering school and an engineering program to pass it. I don't necessarily think passing it makes you a good engineer or as a reflection on your capacity to be a good engineer, but it's more a reflection on your capacity to do the type of coursework and stuff that comes with the engineering profession. So it weeds out a lot of people who maybe could be very good engineers, but don't pass the test necessarily, or don't pass it the first time. I was lucky enough to pass it the first time. I don't remember my score, but I do remember that I didn't pass by a lot. It was a really difficult time. Once you pass the test, you become a licensed engineer. For many years, that was it. You just paid your license fee every other year. You would get a 2-year license, and then you would be considered, able to practice and sign plans, sign specifications, and generally that's the big difference between a licensed engineer and an unlicensed engineer or someone else, is that you can sign plans. There are a lot of things that are required to be signed by a licensed engineer. State statutes require this, state rules require this. Sometimes different organizations will have rules, or cities say this has got to be signed by a licensed engineer. Getting the license allows you to do that. There's been some conversation about who has the ability to give advice, engineering advice. And this week, a number of people have sent me things about situations where people gave advice that engineers took exception to, and actually people who had gotten turned into the engineering board for giving engineering advice. I know the board here in the state because they send out this twice a year thing of all the complaints that they've received and the investigations and what they found. I know there are a lot of complaints where people are giving engineering advice without a license. I don't know where the line on that is. And quite frankly, I don't know if it's very clear, and I think it's much debated. The stuff that people sent me this week was kind of appalling to me, because it included instances where people serving on a bike committee questioned the design that was brought to them by an engineer, felt that there should be bike lanes or there should be other kind of standard type of things, and those were not allowed. And the engineer pushed back on that and said, look, you can't demand those things because you don't have a license and I do. There were other things like that were brought up that I thought crossed the line. On the other hand, I have seen places where people went out and designed culverts that were supposed to drain things, and things flooded out. And I've seen people design spans on roofs that served really important structural parts of structures that they represented. They had the skill and the capacity to do this, and they didn't, and really bad things happened. So I'm happy that there's a board of engineering licensing that reviews this stuff and stays on top of it, and I'm happy that there is a board that looks into these kind of things. What the complaint that I received had nothing to do with my competence as an engineer. any plans that I signed, any specifications that I wrote. It had to do with the advocacy that we do here at Strong Towns. I don't really want to get into who the person was that made the complaint. It really wasn't a big deal in terms of that individual. I don't know them. I've never met them. We had a little Twitter spat back in November that you can kind of go back in the archives and see. But I do think, and in the radio interviews and the press interviews I've done over the last couple of days, I've taken great lengths to emphasize that I think most engineers stand with me and the ability to speak out and the ability to discuss and talk about different ways of doing things. I think that there is a small group within the profession who is uncomfortable with does tend to be a little more outspoken than what a lot of, I think, the more socially humble engineers tend to be. And you don't go into engineer and have a minor in theater, right? Most engineers don't tend to combine that type of aptitude. You tend to be more soft-spoken. And so I think, you know, sometimes there's some of the profession that are uncomfortable with that. I also think, and this is maybe the most important one, there's a certain mindset in the profession that really goes around building more and constructing more, and what I would call the American Society of Civil Engineers narrative of needing more money. And I know I've gotten pushback on that a few times in being so outspoken on the other side that maybe I'm damaging not only the reputation of the profession, but the livelihood of some people within the profession. I think that is a minority viewpoint. And, you know, particularly from the feedback that I've gotten this week from my fellow licensed engineers who have been, quite frankly, appalled that this has taken place, I think it's safe to say that that is a minority viewpoint. Jason, I see that you've been able to get on. I'm not sure what miracle brought you here of technology, but I'm happy that you're here. Can you hear me? And welcome to the Friday News discussion.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. You're coming in fine. Let me introduce you. Jason DeGray is from the Boston area. He is a project manager at Greenman Peterson. He is a licensed engineer, and Jason is a member of Strong Towns. He's also very active in the Institute for Traffic Engineers. And I wanted to have him on to ask him some questions about ITE, about the profession, and about some of the stuff that he works on. Jason, first of all, welcome, and thank you for doing this. And sorry about the technical snafus and getting in today.
I'm just glad to be here now.
Hey, the profession itself is very used to building new stuff. And I think a lot of the processes and the systems and the mindsets that are kind of ingrained in our profession is based around that new way of building. How is this shift to maintenance, or the reality that we built a lot of stuff and now we have a lot of stuff to maintain, how is that affecting how people are going about their work now? How is that affecting contracts and projects and the conversation within the profession?
Well, I think you're right. There's a lot of ingrained values that I think are somewhat subconscious, that are not even recognized, that we're still applying a mindset of building something new to projects, which essentially are maintenance projects. So it creates a dynamic oftentimes where you have to look at it wholesale, and if you want to do something minor, you have to break off the entire project, and it begins to spiral, and it becomes a self-fulfilling exercise that allows projects to grow from the mindset of it's all part of the charge, but it does not respect the economic element of the equation.
I've been in meetings, and I know that you've been in meetings, where we kind of sit and look at the total amount of stuff that needs to be done. and the tiny little bit of budget that we have to do it with. Some of those meetings, you walk out banging your your fist against your head, going, "We got to change what we're doing." But other ones I've been in where there's been real good dialogue about, okay, we got to start thinking about this stuff differently. Have you had experiences like that? And where do you think that financial pinch point of this conversation is kind of pushing us?
I've had conversations like that, very warranted conversations in rooms where you feel like you've made real strides towards a more fundamental understanding of the way we build our places. I've yet to really see that, though, translate outside the room. It becomes to a point when everyone comes to an agreement of, if we want to invest in this place and do what's economically resilient, this is what we should do. Yet, more often than not, it loses steam a lot of times and behind the vision. Oftentimes it doesn't leave the meeting room. Once it goes to the public in the first kind of pushback and the value set that led to the kind of suburban ideal that's still out there, once that confronts a more realistic point of view, it kind of falls flat, because it leaves people at that point having to take ownership of this message in an environment where the message doesn't resonate. And that's an interesting dynamic, and one that I'm not quite sure how do you bring this message and try to bring people along. It's really a public relations discussion.
I hear engineers say that a lot, where they'll essentially say, look, we know we can't do it this way, and we know that this is not sustainable, that there has to be some serious change. But when we broach that, we get really violent pushback from the public, and we get really violent pushback from public officials who are demanding a certain thing. How is that tension within the profession resolved? I mean, when people are telling us, this is what we want, and we're saying, well, we can't really do that, are we just relegated to being bit players in the conversation? Or is there something different that we can be doing, maybe, to help bridge that gap a little bit?
I really think it is the engineering profession has to evolve at this point in time. It's the role in which engineers typically view themselves, in my opinion, is too siloed. We do have to start thinking about the ethical end of this thing, and I think that discussion amongst the engineering community is really in its infancy, and I think that's where the leverage point is. We have to start viewing what we do from the ethical point of view of public health, public finances, stewardship of the environment, and some of those things are evolving. Some of them have really not taken hold. There are those in the profession who want to go down that road, but we need a critical mass.
You're involved in the ITE and the Institute of Traffic Engineers, and I have never lumped the ITE in with like the American Society of Civil Engineers and some of those groups, but ITE is an organization that I think at its roots tends to be a little, I won't say stodgy, but a little old in some of the formulaic approaches that come out of ITE. Now, ITE has also done some really innovative things. What do you think the role of some of these professional organizations like ITE will be as this dialogue matures and that critical mass starts to accumulate?
Well, first, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and I only say that because traffic becomes a kind of label that some of us in the industry are trying to steer away from quite a bit. But I think the role, honestly, I think there needs to be a profession that speaks to the new transportation vision, and there are great people within ITE who are doing just that, but it is a organization of a wide range of engineers, and a lot of them are still legacy mindset that, to a certain degree, cognitively does not get the new value set to which we're talking. My hope is that ITE will pivot and become an organization that really does reinforce this value set that's emerging, and they seem to be at the moment struggling to find their footing in this paradigm. I would say over the past year they've made tremendous strides, and it's hopeful that it's going to continue, but time will tell. I will tell you this, though, I don't know if there is a professional organization out there that really speaks to specifically a set that would like to, and that's a void waiting to be filled. Organization like Strongtowns comes to mind.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, just as a last question.
Mm-hmm.
I feel optimistic, and I feel optimistic because I think that, well, let me just put it this way. I've never met an engineer personally that I didn't think was a nice person, a decent person, a moral person, someone who took their job and task very seriously. Now, I've had some strong disagreements with engineers about what that meant and what like a safe street would be, but I've never met one who didn't care. I have some hope that this profession is going to make some big strides in the coming years, and I just want to know from you if you have that same kind of hope, and if it's based on something specific, I'd like you to be able to share that.
Chuck, I think I lost you a little bit on that one, but I would say that the transportation engineer is servicing a very, an architecture for suburbia. That's how I've kind of phrased it recently. That all our manuals, all the all the methodologies in which we follow, they are an architecture for a very specific type of land use, and the transportation system is reinforcing that land use. And I don't think that is something that many engineers cognitively think about routinely. They look at it more, my charge is to do this specific thing, and not the bigger picture. That's changing, and I think what people understand that now, I think there is a palpable understanding of this is what we've kind of created. The question is, how do we pivot and change that? And the reaction at this point seems to be to kind of go back into these formulas and tweak them or make them more sophisticated to meet the needs of the day. And I don't think that's the approach that's really going to get us to where we need to be. We kind of have to understand that we need to take this system and put it aside and be honest that the new land use transportation system that we aspire to is going to require a whole different approach. It is about urban design in a lot of ways. It's about linking form to function specifically to that specific place. It's not something that can be dogmatically applied through formulas and metrics that essentially are made to ensure vehicle capacity. It's simply not going to work, and we have to be strong enough to stand up and say that.
Jason DeGray, I want to thank you for being part of the discussion today. For those of you that want to get a hold of Jason, I've got his contact information on LinkedIn, on the strongtowns.org site for this conversation. Jason, thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Anytime.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, and take care, have a good weekend, and keep doing what you can to build strong towns. Bye, everybody.